Welcome to Writer's Digest Presents. Hosted by the editors of Writer's Digest, this monthly podcast features conversations with writing and publishing experts whose insights will help ignite your creative vision, hone your skills, build your platform, and get your work out into the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Writer's Digest Presents. I'm content editor Michael Woodson, here with editor-in-chief Amy Jones. Over on writersdigest.com, we have a series called Fight Right, where trained fighter and author Carla Hoch shares her expert insight into writing energetic, realistic fight scenes to our stories regardless of genre. She has written 2 books on the subject, Fight Right, How to Write Believable Fight Scenes, and her newest book, Fight Right Round 2, available now. We are so thrilled to have Carla join us today on the podcast. Thanks so much for being here, Carla.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So really briefly, if you don't mind telling our listeners about yourself, how you got into professional fighting, and how you've sort of married that to writing.
Oh, mercy. Okay, well, about 13, 14 years ago, I took a self-defense class because I was writing a YA series that had fight scenes. And I didn't know the first thing about writing a fight scene. And so I thought, I'll take a self-defense class. I only need one. It's fighting. How hard can it be? And it started a long addiction to combat sports. And I started out in the self-defense class, and then the teacher, I was like 38 at the time. Go ahead and do that math in your head. I'm 51 now. I was 37, 38. And the coach said, we have MMA. Why don't you join us? And I'm like, because I'm old and I can't do that. And he said, you don't have to get in the cage. I'm like, I can't do that. So I did it. Basically, if I decide I can't do something, that means I probably should do it. Except, jumping out of a plane, I really can't do that. And so I started an MMA training, and that just went on and on and on. And I started doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu kind of as my main passion because I loved it. But then I would see a Groupon for Aikido. I'm like, I'll do that. And then, I have a friend that's like, I'm taking private judo lessons. Do you want to do them with me? I'm like, yeah, I'll do that. So it's just been one thing after another. And when I started doing that, and when Fight Right kind of started, a friend of mine said, boy, it makes all that fighting worth it. And I said, no, it makes all that writing worth it. It really does, because fighting and writing are so incredibly similar. If you tell the average person I'm in the middle of a fight camp and I've got to start my weight cut next week, they will look at you like, monkey flew out of your face. Yeah. And it's the same thing when you tell somebody I'm writing a book, or no, I'm in my 3rd round of edits. And they're like, well, what does that mean? And my teammates, one of them said, she goes, I had no idea writing a book took so long. I'm like, it does. It takes a really long time. And you do get emotional, and you do get beat down, and you do want to quit. And just like with fighting, you got to have resiliency or you won't last. You're going to get down. For it. Absolutely. You have to have resiliency, and you have to just kind of refuse to get up. So they've just really kind of had so much in common. I've said on the Venn diagram, there's a huge overlap between fighting and writing. There really is.
That's so interesting. Yes. I wouldn't have thought of those comparisons at all.
Very similar.
But when you put it like that, it makes sense. Like you said, when you say you're on 3rd round of edits, they're like, oh, you don't just write the book and that's
Seriously.
it.
No, you don't.
No, that's not how it works.
You don't. And the thing about fighting and writing is I've had people in jiu-jitsu say, when does jiu-jitsu get easy? And I'm like, it doesn't get easy. And it's the same with writing. You are constantly, whether you realize it or not, you're raising the bar for yourself. Yeah. And so what was good jiu-jitsu a year ago is now like your worst day. And so and it's the same with writing. I get comments in on the Fight Right blog from things that I wrote, oh dear heavens, 5 years ago. You have so many spelling errors. You should go back and get your spelling errors. And I'm not just like, bless you, have a wonderful day. I don't say a word. But that's the writer I was then. I look back at my fighting from 5 years and I'm like, oh my gosh, that was my fighting. And the learning is like this. You're going to have days that are absolutely fabulous. And as a creative, my son also deals with music, and he's like, I'm not doing anything good right now. And I'm like, that means you're about to have a boost. That means things are about to turn around, because the brain hates change. It hates it. And so it will fight against change as much as it can. So I have to tell people in jiu-jitsu, if you are doing terrible right now, that means your brain is about to just say, fine, I'm done. We'll learn this. You win, we'll learn. And it's the same thing with writing. You're going to have times where you sit down and you're just like, I can't do this. Or you're going to have days when your workload at your other job or your family or illness or, I constantly have some type of injury going, and heaven forbid if it happens to my hands. So you just have to be patient with the process and understand that's not an impediment to your writing. It's just part of it. It's part of the process. Getting injured in jiu-jitsu, it's part of the process. Quit looking at it as something that's keeping you from it. Just look at it as, oh yeah, this is how it's like a traffic jam. Oh yeah, this happens. This is a normal part of going on a road trip. And that's you just have to look at it like that. Quit looking at the roadblocks as roadblocks and just look at them as part of the road trip, basically.
So I was going to save this question sort of as a closing question, but it just ties in so perfectly with what you said, how you got into fighting. And I'm wondering about what is the best advice that you can give writers who don't really know anything about fighting, but suddenly realize their book or story is going to need a fight scene? I don't imagine the first piece of advice is go sign up for all of these classes.
No. Again, I was looking back at the first Fight Right book, and I'm so thankful for that book. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Okay, I will get to your point. There it is. I was actually a keynote. I was a keynote this summer at a writing conference, and I was kind of telling about the formation of Fight Right and just kind of the testimony of what it is to be a part of that. And I just mentioned I focused on what an absolutely crucial part you all played in it. You were crazy to take a chance on me. You're bananas to look at somebody who basically had no library, that was just saying, I can do it, and I'm just so grateful to y'all. And you've been so incredibly easy to work with. All that said, if you are trying to figure out how to write a fight scene, no, you do not have to go take fight classes. Stephen King did not live in the sewers and kill children for writing
that we know of.
That we know of. Yeah. The day's not over yet, but that we know of. I mean, sci-fi writers, they're not aliens. They're not hobbits. Totally. They're not. And so you're like, well, how can you possibly do these things? Well, because you focus on the sensory details. And I think comic books and graphic novels are prime examples of this. When you open up a comic book and you see somebody punching another, nowhere does it say he got punched so hard. Nowhere. How do you know? Because you see the person's head kicking back and recoiling. You see that big call out bubble around it. Even if it doesn't say bam, because that spiky bubble is there. And it makes it a sensory experience. So no, not everybody knows what it's like to get punched in the eye, but y'all, everybody's gotten something in their eye at some point. You understand your eye waters, and when one eye closes, what happens to the other? It closes slightly. When your eyes water, your nose waters, and your entire body is like, wait, something's wrong with our eyeballs. We have to take care of our eyeballs. And so really look at the sensory experience of the thing, because even if you don't have fight experience, you're a human and you're presumably writing for a human audience. And so look at what we all have in common. And what we all have in common is that human experience and the sensory details, especially pain. Pain is a huge way to really connect with your reader, because everybody has felt pain. Everybody understands that.
Yeah. And something that I've always loved about editing your Fight Right piece for the website is how you manage to incorporate all different kinds of genre into what you're teaching readers, which tells me that even if you're not looking to write a fight scene, there's a lot about the energy of fight scenes, the tension they build, the action they provide, that can help you understanding, it can help you understand writing in a multitude of ways. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think sometimes people think of fighting as just, throwing hands and fisticuffs. And I would say that's only 20% of the fights that happen in the world. On a day-to-day basis. 80 to 90% of fights going on are just a clash of wills. And it's when two people want the same thing, and you have to decide how's that going to work. And honestly, the winner of the fight a lot of the times, and this is such a negative way to put it, but facts are facts. It's whoever's willing to create the most pain first.
Mm.
And so, if you and, oh, this is terrible, you and a loved one are in a fight, there's two ways it can end. One can concede and say, you know what, you mean more to me than this dumb dishwasher.
Sure.
Or one can turn around and say a snarky comment like, what monkey loaded this dishwasher? I would be that monkey.
I am often the monkey, yes.
I'm the monkey. I didn't have a dishwasher growing up. And so I'm like, okay, he created the most pain first. He wins. I am the monkey. So, I mean, just look at fights as really a clash of wills. And it's two people who want the same thing and what you're willing to do to get it. In the real world, if you get in a fight, there's two ways to end it. It's to either concede and say, okay, you got this, or to create so much pain that the other person, again, submits to you. So it's all about who's willing to submit in the situation. Words can be pretty darn violent and hurtful. And I can tell you that I have gotten through so many injuries. This is ridiculous. I have a drawer of body braces. So if you've got a hand, I've got slings for an arm, ankle, knees, back brace. And so, when people get hurt at the gym that are my size, I'm like, don't get the brace. I got you one. I don't even remember those very well. Like I have to say, well, let me look at my pile and see if I've got a knee brace. I forget that, but I don't forget the hurt, you know? Maya Angelou, she said, people will forget what you say, but they won't forget how you made them feel. And I think like as you walk through a bookstore and you see a book and you're like, oh, I loved that book. And somebody says, what did you love about it? And you're like, it's just good. And the truth is you don't remember verbatim why you love that book, but you remember the feeling you get when you see it. And it's the same thing with your writing. Really connect with your reader with how they feel. And pain is especially strange. We have these neurons in our brain called mirror neurons, and they're basically monkey see, monkey do neurons. And it's how we learn to do things as babies. Babies sit at the table and they eat just fine with their hand, but they look around and they think, everybody has spoon. Why don't I have spoon? I want spoon. Their hands are working fine. Why do they want spoon? Because you have it and you give it to them. And even if you don't tell them how to hold it, they figure it out. And it's because when their brain sees you holding and using the spoon, literally the same portion of their brain lights up as if they are one holding the spoon. If I see you jump rope, the part of my brain that would be active while I jumped rope is active. And so when you have these scenes in your book where something hurts somebody, like, everybody used to watch America's Funniest Home Videos. That's just, it used to be before social media. And we would see somebody fall and what would the audience do?
Lose their minds.
Why? Nobody in that audience got hurt. But their mirror neurons were like, ooh, we know how that feels.
Yeah.
So that's really find the common ground with your reader and really just dig into that common ground.
It's interesting to say that about words can be violent because it reminds, there's no question here, but I remember hearing a therapist talk about how the biggest mistake couples make when they start couples therapy is assuming it's a space for them to say the most unkind thing because they see it as that's where we're here, to be honest. Right. But you can't, you said that, you still said the thing. And that can end up doing more damage than what we're here for.
Right. If you go to neutral ground, let's say that, all these countries are at a war and they go to Sweden to talk it out. They don't shoot each other while they're talking out. Right. That's not what neutral ground means. So I understand that completely. Yeah.
So I'm going to keep talking about this idea of different genres because I think that's one of the things that appealed to me when you first pitched that book to Writer's Digest. Because when you think about fight scenes, it can happen in almost any genre. Like you were talking about, a YA novel could have a bully picking on someone in a hallway and that's a fight scene. Or a romance novel could have competing love interests acting like fools.
Right.
And that was one of the things that I had to explain to the people at Pub Board to get the book approved was that this isn't going to be just for people who are writing crime novels or people who are writing, medieval Game of Thrones style
Right.
battle books, you know?
Right.
So could you tell us about some of the most surprising fight scenes you've helped other writers figure out?
Oh my gosh. Um, you know, there are some writing conferences I go to that I mentor writers. In the South, we say mentor, but it's mentor. And a guy sat down with me and he goes, well, I have this kind of futuristic thing, which immediately my ears went, futuristic thing, tell me about it. And he said, well, it's kind of like there's nothing left. It's like dystopian. And I'm like, are you talking about Mel Gibson? Oh, now I can't think of it, of course. What are Thunderdome? What's that movie series? Oh my gosh, I've just aged out
Mel
on
Gibson?
y'all. They were the originals.
Mad Max?
Yes. And I said,
Yeah.
you mean like Mad Max? And he goes, yeah. And he goes, he's got to get through this area where there's all these people. And I'm like, does he have a car? And he goes, yeah, but they can block the car. They have cars too. And I'm like, put spikes on the wheels.
Totally.
He's like, kidding me? And I'm like, do you not know why big rig trucks sometimes put those on them? It's if you get close, you get damaged. And he was like, oh. And I was like, does it have a sunroof? And he goes, yes. I'm like, are you kidding me?
Wow.
Just start throwing things at people. Anytime you make somebody recoil, and so he and I just kind of talked through it. He goes, I didn't even think of that. And I'm like, that's why I'm here.
Yeah.
Because I think that's my job. It's literally what I do. One of the first fight scenes I remember, and this is when I actually used to edit fight scenes, a guy said, I have these two aliens and well, no, one's an alien and one guy's trying to get back to his spaceship. And this is a very good example of writers. When you do find yourself kind of stuck in a fight scene, you've got to be willing to sometimes change your original vision because the story requires it.
Totally.
Okay.
There we go again with we're on draft 3.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The story, it's not about what you want. It's what the story needs.
Yeah.
And so here's two different situations. I had a lady, she had all these people going into an empty spaceship hangar, which I'm like, no hangars are empty, but whatever.
Right.
And she said, well, I have these 3 people and a robot's coming after them. And I said, and she goes, I need them to beat the robot. And I'm like, okay. So she tells me about the robot. And I was like, what buffers do you have? She goes, what do you mean? I was like, what can they get behind? She goes, nothing. It's empty. I said, well, in fairness, hangars aren't empty. They have tools and things. She goes, no, it's empty. And so anything I said to her, she's like, well, no, it's empty. And I said, and I'm just thinking, what does it matter for the story if it's empty? You want them to survive. That's what matters most. And so I just finally said, I said, you know what? I bet you are going to brainstorm the heck out of this and just let me know how it turns out. Okay, well, then another guy, he goes, the man needs to get to a spaceship. There's an alien between him and the spaceship. Alien's got a gun at him. And he goes, but there's no weapons around. I'm like, well, does he have a knife? No, he doesn't have a knife. It's like, well, what's the terrain like? He goes, there's nothing. It's just rocks. And I said, rocks, you say? And he goes, yeah, like small rocks. And I'm like, pocket sand. I'm like, literally, he can fall in front of the guy, have the alien say, get on your knees, I'm going to kill you like a dog or whatever. And so he gets on his knees, but then he throws sand up at the guy's face. He goes, but he's got a gun on him. And I'm like, all you need is a moment. It's like, I want to say, do you not watch any true crime? All it takes to get away from any horrible situation is that one moment, just a tiny moment. So if you find yourself stuck in any kind of scene, I don't care what kind of scene it is. Number one, what does the story require from this scene? Does this person need to live? Do they need to get injured? Okay, let's say, they need to be injured. Okay, and this is how I work through fight scenes with people. I'm like, does it need to be a visible injury? Yeah, I'm like, okay, well, let's go for the face. Okay, now, what's malleable is how that comes about. That's the only thing that needs to stay. So if your character just needs to be able to go to the next scene, walk normally, everything be fine, but their back be killing them, then figure out a way to hurt their back. Don't get stuck on your one vision for the scene, because when you start a book, the thing you finish, I marvel at people who outline, to the nth degree, because what I end up with, so Fight Right Round 2, crafting chaos, combat, and crime, which I dropped part of that at the ISBN. But when it was pitched to Penguin, my editor pitched it. It wasn't the book it is now. I don't blame them for turning down that book. Like, we're not interested. And then my agent was like, keep working on this. You can do better than this. And it's true. It's a whole different book than I started with. So just be willing to alter your vision to make your dream come true. That's how it's going to have to work. And if I don't ever answer the question, say, hey, dude, you didn't answer that, because my mind is like squirrels running. It will just
You're
keep
so
going.
good at this, though. Like, I can tell that people clamor to your classes.
I literally do this for a job.
Yeah.
I literally do. It's crazy. It's crazy. When people at the gym are like, oh, you're a writer, what do you write? I'm like, I teach writers how to write fight scenes. And they look at me like, I'm going to keep talking. I'm like, that's it. That's what I do.
But not that's it. I mean, what you just described is like so much characterization that like had nothing to do with like the literal fight scene. Like the idea of like find a reason why his back would be killing him is like character development.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Do you want this injury to lead to an idiosyncrasy that this person has for their whole life? Odin's going to be missing an eye his whole life. Jacob's going to have a limp his whole life. So that's what needs to stay. Just find a way to get to that.
Yeah, totally.
So I want to go back to the new book in a few minutes, but first I want to, with these examples, you were talking about weapons of opportunity, which is, I think, one of my favorite sections from the first Fight Right book, because I think it's so useful as an idea for writers. And it has become ingrained in my brain. So now whenever I go into a new room, I'm like, what weapon is here?
Absolutely.
And I'm also, in some regards, deeply regretting getting a car that doesn't have a CD player.
Totally.
Because I have no excuse to carry CDs anymore.
You could use a credit card. Shop in the edge of your credit card.
So could you explain better than I did what weapons of opportunity are, and
you explained
give
it
some
perfectly.
examples?
Weapons of opportunity are anything that in its intended use is not a weapon, but you can use as a weapon. Every baby on the planet understands this. The moment you throw a block at your sibling, that is a weapon of opportunity, 100%. And the first time I really started thinking about this was way back eons ago when I was a high school teacher. And this is when violence in schools was becoming a big deal. And so I stood in the classroom one day and I looked around and I thought, okay, if somebody comes in here, how am I going to handle that? And I thought, you know what? A fire extinguisher would cloud the room. A fire extinguisher, I could hit them in the face with it, and I did. I talked to my students. I said, look, y'all, somebody walks through that door, you pick up your books and you start throwing it at them. And they're like,
seriously,
we could get shot. And I'm like, not if you're in the middle of throwing books.
Absolutely.
And so, and then when I started doing some training, I actually trained with somebody who had a lot of experience with that. There are some martial arts that really use that. Kung Fu, for example, is very keen with weapons of opportunity because Kung Fu is made for a crowded street. That's why the movements of Kung Fu tend to be all within an arm's width. And so you just start looking around. So in your scene, for example, the guy throwing a rock, you don't have to have a weapon to have a weapon. I am watching the show Slow Horses right now.
Love Slow Horses.
Yes. So do
I. The writing of that is so Gary Oldman.
Yes. I don't know how they do it.
I don't know how they do it. It's so fantastic. Yeah. I have so much respect for TV writers like Vince Gilligan. You want to talk about a writer crush? I am in Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. Doesn't get much better than that. Slow Horses, it's getting up there. But I just finished the first season and this guy has had a gun held on him so long, which the whole time I'm like, grab the gun. But I understand. At one point, he finally just picks up a rock and throws it and it hits the guy in the head. And I'm like, that's it. And for personal safety, because I used to teach self-defense quite a bit. I'm like, look around you right now. Are you carrying a Stanley Cup? You could whack the snot out of somebody with a Stanley Cup. Okay. And jiu-jitsu, and judo the same way. Clothing is your weapon. You choke somebody with their hoodie. You throw them by their sleeve. And so for personal safety, when you're walking, when you go in somewhere, this is terrible. There used to be a meme and it says, be polite and a plan to kill everybody. And, you walk in the room, look where your exits are. Look at what is around you. My husband used to work special operations in the military. And when we started dating, he had some idiosyncrasies about him. He's not going to sit facing a door. He's not going to sit backed against the wall. He's going to have a plan of escape. And at first I thought, this guy's bananas. Why do you need, and I've gotten to be the same way.
Sure.
So when you are having a hard time getting your character out of the scene, look at what the scene itself offers you.
Yeah.
Look at the buffers within that scene. Is somebody chasing you? Get behind a couch. They're going to have to climb over the couch to get, and the moment it takes them to climb behind the couch, you'll get to the kitchen. The kitchen is a Pandora's chest of weapons of opportunity, which I call woos. Coffee pot. Not only do you have hot coffee, you have the coffee pot itself. Get glass on the floor. Put dish soap on the floor. Make it difficult for them to get back and forth.
Yeah.
And the thing with the CD. So in the book, I talk about if you're in a pinch and you need a sharp weapon, break a CD in half, because that is crazy sharp.
Seriously.
Super sharp. Yeah. So start looking around you, just out of the sake of interest. I've had writers, I'm like, okay, look around you now and tell me what's a weapon. And they're in a crowded room and they're like, I was like, do you have a chair? Yeah. I was like, what about the person next to you? And I'm like, they could block. I mean, look, it's the apocalypse, people. You don't have to be fast. You just have to be faster than this guy. That's all there is to it. So yeah. Makes you look at the world differently.
Yeah.
It really
and people
does.
in the world. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it does.
Talking about genre again, how do different genres dictate do they dictate how you teach writers to fight or to write fight scenes?
Well, some genres, yes. Fantasy, you're going to have a lot of HEMA, which is historical, HEMA, historical European martial arts, which people think martial arts, that is only in Asia and Brazil. False. Historical European martial arts, so that's edged weaponry. And it's not just the edge weaponry, really. It's the fisticuffs that go on. It's the grappling in between and all that kind of stuff. So I talk about edged weaponry a lot when I'm at sci-fi fantasy conferences. I also talk about created weaponry because people love to create weaponry. And I'm like, well, what does this weapon do? And dealing with magic. Back to sci-fi fantasy people, they're so fun. They're like, well, I'm battling a wizard. And I'm like, of course. So where do we go from here? And then, well, what are their magical abilities?
Right.
Well, when I am more at a conference like Writer's Digest, what I do is I teach the basics of just how the body is oriented when you're fighting, both an educated orientation and regular folks orientation. And so I kind of let people get kind of warmed up and I can see their brains working. I'm like, what questions do you have? And they're like, so I remember somebody said, well, what if you're down in a foxhole? And I'm like, that's a problem. And they're like, oh, why is it a problem? And I'm like, you're in a foxhole. You got nowhere to go. I was like, now you can shoot up, but gravity is working with them. And they're like, oh. And I'm like, that's why fighting, that Sun Tzu in the Art of War said, don't fight uphill because your opponent has gravity to their favor. So yeah, it really does change depending on the conference. And when you have mystery thriller people, you talk about guns, but I'm also going to talk about wounds. Stages of decomposition is big because they want to be able to show how long a person's been dead versus, oh, look, they've been dead 48 hours.
Sure.
So I do have to switch around and I absolutely love it. And this book talks. So one of the aspects of fighting, we talk about fighting is a mental game. It is the most dangerous. Okay. So anybody who's taken one of my classes in particular, I start the class and I say, okay, get in groups of 3. You have 1 minute to create the most dangerous character. You can only give them one ability. Go. And so, strong, fast. And I know the people who've taken the class before because they're going, I'm like, don't say it. Don't say it. The most dangerous character, the most dangerous person in the room is always going to be the one most willing. I don't care how much fight knowledge you have. I don't care how many guns are in your bullet. If you're not willing to use it, it's a liability against you. It truly is. And so sometimes when we're fighting mentally, we aren't willing. For example, we aren't willing to tell the truth. And when you do lie, that's actually, it activates the adrenal system because it's part of survival mode. It's flight. Lying is a product of the flight response. And so that's why the body kind of acts a little different. Well, deception isn't lying, technically. Lying is a blatant untruth. Deception is a redirection from where you wanted to go. And some of it may be truth. And so I talk about the tools people use when they deceive, the ways people talk, even when they're lying, because that too is a weapon of opportunity. If you want to get realistic, the mind is a huge weapon of opportunity.
Absolutely.
But that is also something that crosses all genres and is very much a part of fighting. And people's body, we think we are so good at playing, we're surprising. Human beings, they never cease to surprise me. No, human beings are not surprising. We will signal to people what we're about to do. The difference is there's people who look for it and people who don't. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, totally. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, good.
Well, and
Okay, good.
it's interesting. Pretty common writing advice is like start your scenes in the middle of the action, and it kind of makes me wonder, like, at what point should a writer start a fight scene? Like, where should a fight scene begin?
Perfect question. Start with the goal of the scene. So especially an injury goal. What's the injury goal of this scene? Even if it doesn't happen, it's okay if it doesn't happen. If my injury goal is to stab, my movement's going to be different than if I'm shooting a bow and arrow. So number one, look at your injury goal and then walk backward from there. In truth, when you are fighting, when I used to compete more in jiu-jitsu, I had a goal. I had several moves that are my favorite moves to do. I am working toward that. I'm going to try to move my opponent to that place. So that is how actual trained fighters, they do things. They lead you to a place that makes you vulnerable and then they attack you. So when you start from your fight scene, say, okay, I know this guy. This is a common one. Where is somewhere my character get hurt and bleed a lot but not die? Okay, so we want a lot of blood, but we don't want them to die. Then you need to cut their head or their scalp. You put the same wound on right here and it's not going to be not very colorful, but any tiny injury to the head is incredibly dramatic. Okay, so that's where we're starting. We're starting with an injury from the head. How do you get there? Okay, now how do you get there? And actually in round 2, I have a fight scene. So you see a fight scene take shape where I take on a giant chihuahua. And so
next to me
start.
is a tiny chihuahua.
Yeah. Oh, mine is a muchihuahua. That's what I call it. And muchihuahua. Okay. So there is a place where the person bites the chihuahua's ear. Okay. Well, how does she bite its ear? Well, the ear gets close to her face. How did the ear get close to her face? Well, it leaned forward. Why did it lean forward? And I realized, chihuahuas have little ears. They don't flop. And so I'm like, got to go back and retool it. But you just say, well, how do we get here? And in the book, like I'll put the sentence out and I'm like, how'd that happen? How'd that happen? And just kind of walk backward, kind of make yourself connect the dots, follow the steps, paint by numbers sort of thing.
Oh, wow. Yeah. This is going to be a little bit of a digression. And you mentioned like TV, like slow horses and stuff. And then also I've been thinking about how with fight scenes in action, like there's a diversity within how to portray fighting and violence. And if we think about television, what came to mind was like comparing shows like the show like Lost and Game of Thrones. Both of those are like really violent shows, but their approach to portraying violence is so different.
Right.
Which tells me there's plenty of ways to go about portraying fight scenes on a sliding scale of like gore and violence.
Oh, absolutely.
And your audience or reader has the ability to believe any of it.
Right.
And so my question is for writers, what is your advice on how to approach a certain level of visceral violence in their fight scenes?
Excellent. I have an entire chapter on that. And it's about, I forget the name of the chapter, but it's basically how much blood do you show? Totally. And it really depends on your target audience. Game of Thrones, that is an audience that has used to, well, everybody now pays to watch TV. You're paid, used to pay for HBO. Right. That was an extra. Those are people who are extra committed. They're generally older. Yeah, you're going to be able to show a lot. Lost. That was regular TV.
Right.
You couldn't show the same kind of things on TV because you know what? You may have a 12-year-old in the room. You may, and also you have the TV standards and everything. You have to look at your target audience. And I think the example I used for kids was Old Yeller. And there's violence. A dog gets killed. And then I show how he showed it. And then I also look at The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Aslan is sacrificed, but the word blood isn't actually used that many times in the whole book. So first thing you need to do is, okay, what's my audience here? And also, what is your goal? I think we have to be careful with being gratuitous on certain things.
Totally.
That's just my personal opinion. Some people what did they used to be? There used to be a name for them back in the 80s. I think slasher films. So Friday the 13th and all that kind of stuff. The slasher films. That there were fans that just went to slasher films. If that's what you're writing, then throw on the buckets.
Yeah.
But otherwise, consider your target audience and, what do you want them to walk away with? And what's the point of your blood? Is your blood there for evidence? Is it there to show how badly someone is injured? Is it there because it needs to make a certain type of mess, because it needs to be spattered? So number one, look at your audience. And what's the point of that blood? In the book, The Shining, Danny Torrance sees blood just dripping down the walls. Well, the point of that blood isn't about an injury. It's the fact they're showing Stephen King showing the reader that Danny has the shining. He can see what's coming. So I know I got chills. Yeah. It's a premonition. It's a premonition of things to come. So what is your audience and what is your point? And then go from there.
We're watching Shogun right now. I don't know if you've seen Shogun.
So good.
We have 2 episodes left.
So
but
good.
And we watched 2 episodes last night. Yeah, well, or
I won't say
something happened. Something just happened that I was like, I actually have to stop watching this.
Yes.
But I was thinking about we were going to talk today. We were watching last night, and I was thinking about how that is a violent show, but it knows when it's not nearly as violent as I would have anticipated going into it, and it really picks its moments to be like, oh, it's a very conversational show. There's so much dialogue, and then someone slitting their own stomachs open, and you haven't seen that for 2 episodes, and the impact is so significant because
it is.
The violence is technically few and far between for a show like it, and then when it happens, it's like the most violent thing I've ever seen. Right. But there's so much ceremony behind it. It
is.
Honor
that's
and ceremony.
The point.
Yes, exactly.
You realize this means so much to him that he's willing to die. Not only die, but a horrible death.
Yes.
Yes. I absolutely love that show so much. So that's a very good example.
Email you when I'm done.
Yeah, that is a fantastic example. And, Alfred Hitchcock said, there's no terror in the bang, only the anticipation of it. I think I got that right. And that is something that in those shows, from the time they bring out that katana, there's just this, and when it actually happens, it's not, and I'm just using this as an example. If you haven't seen the show, I'm not ruining anything. So let's say that they cut somebody's arm off. The arm falling to the floor is the least of it. You walk away going, they cut his arm off? It's the action of it. The nerve, and something else about that show that I think helps you get away with things is the absolute beauty of using a katana. The katana is it's an artistic weapon. The movements and everything. When you see, you jump over and you're looking at the early 20th century in New York. Four corners where they're all boxing and gross. That's just not artistic. It's very primal and everything. And I've worked with a katana. It's hard. It's hard. And part of what makes it hard is how fluid you have to be with it. So I do think part of the reason they do get away with it, it's like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. The way they get away with some of it, you're just like, that was so
it's beautiful.
It's beautiful. It is.
And you're right about the anticipation, something we need to move on, but something that happened, I was like, this can't happen. This isn't happening. This can't happen. And then it happened. And the anticipation of it was so much worse than the actual.
It really,
And so that you're right. Once it was over, I was like, I can't believe they did that. I can't believe that happened.
Right.
Yeah. That's interesting.
And, generally you don't walk away from the scene going, again, their arm hit the floor and it sounded like a wet towel. Nobody says that. They say they cut his arm Oh,
Yes.
it's always the action that stays
Yes.
with you. It's that leading up to that moment.
Mhm.
Yeah. Anxiety. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Anxiety and it's like that with fighting. When
Mhm.
people are going toward their first competition or their first, fight, and I'm like, this is the worst of it. The moment
Totally.
that the ref says go, that's all gone, which is
Mm.
something that I need to point out. If your fight scene is first person, your character will not be afraid as they fight. When you go into survival mode, one of the jobs of adrenaline is to water down your emotions. So it's not fear that you're feeling. In the Book of Five Rings, I'm getting so nerdy here. My nerd is showing so hard. So that's an ancient Japanese treaty on sword fighting. And they compare each level of learning to different elements. This is the earth chapter, this is the air chapter. Well, then you have this last chapter called the void, where there's just nothing but you in that moment. And that's how it is when you're in a fight, whether it's a planned competition or a surprise attack. Nothing exists in that moment except survival. And so I've heard people say, oh, terrified, she fought for her life. She fought for her life, but she wasn't terrified. I actually, years ago, wrote a blog post. I interviewed a lady who'd been attacked by half a dozen people. It was terrible. And here's another thing. They don't wait and take turns when they're beating you.
Seriously.
They don't like tag out next person. They were all kicking her and punching her. And I said, what were you thinking in that moment? And she goes, survive. She goes, I thought grab her hair. And it is, the thoughts are very... I was in a competition, and I understand this isn't like survival, but it's the survival mode anyway. Your body doesn't know the difference. I had a surgeon tell me that one time. He's like, your body doesn't know the difference in a bear attack and surgery. So be careful, be kind to yourself after surgery.
Totally.
So I'm in the middle of a competition, and I was getting really close on weight. You have to be a certain weight class. And my gi was almost like 3.5 pounds. And so I got really close, and I thought, I won't wear a rash guard, something like this underneath it. I'll just wear a sports bra. No big deal. My gi covers it up. Well, of course, the gi came open. That's fine. A lot of women just wear sports bras. God bless my opponent. She reached up, and she meant to get my collar, and she grabbed my sports. Y'all, the world went to slow motion. And it just kept going farther and farther down. And I looked down at it, and I looked up because there was a fence, and there's like 100 people at the fence and more in the crowd. And I thought, this is how it happens.
Yep.
Not, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed, but this is how it happens.
Yeah.
And I thought, am I willing to let this happen to win? Yeah.
Yeah.
They'll forget it.
Totally.
It's not memorable. They'll forget it. But yeah, you go into a place where nothing else exists but that moment. That's some fighters have a hard time hearing their coach, because they're so entrenched in the moment. There's no voices out there. You literally have to learn to pick your coach's voice out. And the weird thing is, you'll hear it. You may not even hear anybody else's, but you'll hear your coach. So it's a void. It's a very different place.
Oh, wow.
This is just tangentially related, but at the same time that I was reading your a draft of your new book, the Fight Right Round 2, I was also reading Pat Barker's books for an interview. They she did a trilogy, The Silence of the Girls, which is sort of a retelling of the Iliad from the perspective of the women who are taken captive.
Right.
And then she has 2 series about that take place in World War One. And I was thinking, like, the fight scenes that she writes in there are exactly how you are describing them. It's about the adrenaline and those like little blips of, you don't have a full conversation going on in your head as this is happening. You're just thinking like the one thing that you need to survive. Right. And that's how she was portraying it in these books. And I thought, she must have read yours.
Yeah, totally.
and adrenaline,
although they were
it's
written
a
in the
universal
90s.
thing. Well, but here's the thing. So part of the reason you spar is the same reason that policemen, do all these things. You know what I mean? They do drills, and firemen do fire drills and all this kind of stuff. It is because the adrenaline's gonna be there, period. The difference is, have you learned to work with it? So the first time that you have to pull your gun on somebody, the first time that you do, or you're in a competition or in a fight, you don't know, like, everything inside you is just like a hurricane. It is a hurricane of everything happening inside you, and you're so inside yourself that you can't really think. And so sparring helps you find your way through that fog. And I told a first responder that I used to train with, and I said, you kind of have an advantage in competitions. He's like, why? I was like, you live in survival mode.
Mm-hmm.
You have learned not to freak out. You have learned that this is how you feel. It is normal. I can work through it. That's just how it is. And that's what sparring does for you. And there are some, fighting styles in martial arts, you can't really spar much. And it's hard because it makes it, harder to actually enact it if you are attacked. So that's the difference. You learn, everybody is going to feel the adrenaline. Everybody's going to get that rush. The difference is the people who have learned to find their way through that fog versus the people who are just looking at the fog.
Sure.
So I mentioned the new book. I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell our listeners about the Fight Right books and like what's sort of in the first one and how is the second one different? What sort of things does it cover? Because it is more, both of them are just so much more than just the actual fight scenes or martial art movements. There's so much more to them than that.
The first book, which is right over here, if it panned that way, you could kind of see, is the basics of writing a fight scene. You're walking into something brand new. I look at it as the foundation and the build out of a house. So you have the foundation and the frame. And if you don't have a foundation and a frame, it's going to be really hard to build the rest of the house. So it kind of introduces you to the concept of fight scenes, how humans react. So it's in five sections, like a 5-round fight. So you have a section that's just about craft. You have a section about humans, what we all bring to the table as fighters because we're human. And then there is a section on weaponry and what weapon is best for your characters. Stop giving your character 2 swords. I'm going to start playing bingo. So help me, I'm going to make a bingo board. And whoever asks the last question, oh, look, 2 swords, that's a bingo. But something I ask in the book is, okay, if they're fighting with 2 swords, how did they learn that? Why do they have that? There's only certain cultures that did that. And there's a reason why certain cultures. So, and then I do talk about different fighting styles and listing the different fighting styles and what might work best. If your character is a surgeon, they're not going to want to be a boxer. They got to take care of their hands. If you want your character to get away with murder, then they don't need to have bruised up hands and scratches on their face. And then I talk about stages of decomposition and injury and the kind of injuries, basic injuries you'll encounter. Well, I looked at that and I started to look at my readership, where my book was really ranking with different genres. And it always ranks high with my fantasy folks, love my fantasy folks, and mystery crime. Sure. I was not prepared for that. And so the second book, if the first book is the foundation and the frame, the second book is the walls and the carpet and the chicken yard in the back. I mean, it's everything else. So I write a lot more about craft in this one for the simple fact I've learned more.
Yeah.
And the very last section of the craft is just a quick and dirty guide to writing your fight scene. You can print that out and keep it on the wall by your computer. I am still one of those old school people that prints things out. So there's 3 sections: writing chaos, combat, and crime. So the first one is writing chaos, and it's just the craft of writing fight scenes. And you do see a fight scene built, and you look at, blocking. Well, where do I start with blocking? What moves do I choose in blocking? Is dialogue realistic? Should I even put dialogue in here? And then again, it'll end up with that fight scene, and then you'll have something you can just kind of keep as a handy reminder. Combat, the next combat section. There's a big chunk of it. I think I have 5 or 6 chapters. This is a long book. It's like 93,000 words. Amy, you are a saint.
Wow.
Thank you so much for reading through this book.
Well, when you mentioned printing things out, when you sent me the file, I printed out the new book so that I could read it because I read better on paper. And I accidentally set, I thought I had the printer set on front and back, and I did not.
I'm so sorry.
I used
love that.
I used an entire ream of paper.
Yes.
Okay. Whoopsie. So as soon as you get to the combat area, I have 5 chapters for the medieval period. And it's, okay, you want to storm a castle? Fine. Everybody wants to write storming a castle. Let's talk about the reality of storming a castle. And it starts from the time you put armor on. And, oh, you're on the battlefield and you have to use the restroom and you have on your armor. Then what? And people are like, oh, you don't have to go to the bathroom when you're fit. Yes, you do.
Are you kidding?
Yes, you do. The thing is, you don't realize it. It just happens. I've seen it firsthand. And different issues with the medieval period that people think, okay, we tore down the wall. Yay. You got to climb over that rubble. You're forgetting that. And that there were people that literally would pay the peasants to come in and get all the rubble away. So storming a castle is like a long process.
Yeah.
And from there, if you're training a combat sports character from the time they walk in the gym to the time they have their first fight. And I have had more people like, my character fights Muay Thai. What does that look like? Well, my character does jiu-jitsu. What does that look like? I'm like, you know what? Here's what it looks like with MMA because it has aspects of all of that. And then, of course, fighting against a magical creature. I go a little bit more in depth than that, and fighting alongside a creature, which I actually had somebody, well, my animal, I fought alongside him. I was like, ooh, I hadn't thought of that. We've been fighting alongside animals since the sense. And so there's different more combat things in there. And then the crime section, which I enjoyed so much. And it does start with interviewing. So, what we think of as police interrogation, it's called an interview. Interrogation is kind of pejorative, so you use interview. And the different ways that they go through this interview process of getting information from people. And I, again, true crime fan, and I love the Interrogation Raw show. And I've started reading about the different ways they do the interview, and I'm like, oh my gosh, he's doing number two. He's doing number two. I see it. And then I talk about body language. And is there a body language that shows somebody's lying? Is that real? I talk about that.
Yeah, you learned about this for the website too.
Yes, I did. Yeah. So we have this idea that, oh, they did such and such. That means they're lying. No, it means that their body is uncomfortable.
Sure.
Yes, they may have gone into survival mode, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're lying. Joe Navarro talked about that in a podcast. He said that, is my client shifting in their chair because they're lying or because the meter ran out and they don't want to be towed?
Right.
So you don't know that they're lying. You only know that they're uncomfortable. I then go on to talk about the patterns people use when they're attempting to deceive. So when you see somebody on TV, tell me what happened in the crime. I drove up. These guys ran out from the bank with guns. They were shooting everybody. Then they drove, and then I called y'all. That's appropriate because when you retell a story, the preface and the ending should be the shortest. The biggest portion is the middle. And that's where the guys ran out and they started. People who attempt to deceive sometimes put more emphasis on the beginning because they're trying to convince you and their own self this is a real thing. So that same situation. Tell me what you saw that day. I was late for work. And so I was speeding and oh my gosh, traffic jam after traffic jam. And I saw the bank and I was right there and I need to get to the bank because I haven't cashed this check. That's different. Now, does it automatically mean that person is lying? No, but it means it's worth investigating them. Ask them different things to see, is that their speech pattern or are they trying to convince themselves of this situation? The next thing I go through is the CSI effect. And there really is an impact that the CSI shows have created generations who think they are forensic scientists. Just like totally. MMA, like UFC has created a generation of people who think they're cage fighters because they watch it. But the fact is, people have watched CSI shows so much, there are certain types of evidence they expect to see when they go to court. And I talked to a defense attorney about this, and he was like, oh my gosh, they want forensic evidence for everything. Look, it was a break-in. There's not going to be a ton of DNA. And even if there is a ton of DNA, we can't waste the money on that DNA because they stole your TV. We need to use it over here. And so, but the fact is, if that's what people expect to see in an actual court, that's what readers are going to expect to see in your book. And so because this is what readers expect to see, I go through the top pieces of forensic evidence that readers are wanting to see and the problems with each of those. And I point the problems out in case you need to get your character out of a jam. I walk all the way through the crime scene, steps of going to a crime scene, make a quick psych reference for criminal characters. What do you call the psychological write-up they make for? Okay, there's a serial killer,
Like
and
the
so
profile?
yes, the psychological profile that they make for crazy criminal characters. I talk about autopsy and steps of autopsy, and then I go through crime scene cleaning. I had forgotten that, oh my gosh, years and years ago, I interviewed a local crime scene cleaner. And I said, what do you, nobody ever
Wow.
thinks about that. You walk away
Yeah.
and you think, and I'm going to tell you what, it made me think back when I was a high school teacher. I left to go somewhere. It was a night I was going to the gym or something, and there was a white van next to my house, like my condo. And I told this story all wrong. Okay, so a violent crime happened in the condo next to mine.
Oh.
Great. And then that little white van came up late at night and they took care of it. And I just thought, why is that van there? Why are the police there? And the guy who lived there was like outside. I'm like, what is happening? He was like, it's people who clean this stuff up. I had no idea.
Wow.
I'm like, and so I interviewed them because, there's a lot that happens well after the autopsy and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
This is what I love about both
Yes.
of your books. There's so much more to think about and to consider, and that you help people consider that they might not even
Yes.
realize exist to think about.
Well, it's like it could be like a search engine for writers, because
yeah.
it's not like you describing how many chapters you have on medieval
Oh my
fight
gosh.
scenes, like thinking about people who are just writing in that time period, like those details, regardless of if they're doing a fight scene, like are so necessary to the reality of their story.
There's also like the class aspect of it too, because
Yes.
you were talking about with, getting the armor. Only
Yeah.
certain people, it costs so much
Right.
to
Oh,
make at certain
totally.
points. So there's
Right.
Class and
Yeah.
societal
Right.
structure kind of factors that are
Right.
into it, that's important. That's
Yeah.
important to get accurately correct, because I think people who read those kinds of
They
books
do forget.
are going to be in tune to that.
And
Yeah.
I'll tell you, it's getting harder to find good medieval references. And I say that as someone who did a lot of referencing because of video games.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many
Yes.
times I started reading something and I'm like, this is a video game. This isn't even
Wow.
a real thing. So yeah, you have to go to a lot of old school references.
Yeah,
on it.
totally.
The medieval period. Oh my gosh. You understand why their life expectancy was like, I don't know,
Yes. How are
50.
we still around
Oh
as a
my gosh,
species?
how did people
Right.
not just die out from,
Yes.
cooties alone? Somebody said to me, oh, well, I want to write an authentic fight scene. No, you don't. You
Yeah.
want to write a realistic fight scene.
Totally.
You don't want authentic Thai. It's like going into a Thai restaurant. I want authentic Thai food. No, you don't, because it would burn through you and burn through the floor. You want realistic Thai food. And when I was reading through all the medieval stuff and all the research, I had thought, here is a prime example. You don't want an authentic medieval scene. You want realistic, because if your medieval scene is authentic, there's going to be a lot of dysentery and syphilis.
Yes.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
the reality. Like, when's the last time you went to a Ren Fest and they're like, ye old syphilis booth, ye
Yeah.
old dysentery care? That was the medieval period,
Mhm.
big time. It was. And they really did use, they would use catapults and launch dead horses
Yeah.
at the
Oh, God.
castles. The reason I started off on that is I read that, some conqueror catapulted people over had plague to spread plague. And honestly, they can't find 100% proof of that. But they absolutely threw dead animals and dead people over.
Yeah.
Not to spread disease, but because it's gross.
Yeah.
And that's
it's
the
foul.
reality of the medieval period. Taking
Yeah.
on a castle is like a month, never mind all the time it takes you to get there. And there are bands of people that are going to go with you the whole time. It's just insane. How anybody survived that? I mean, I don't know if you can tell by looking at me. Those are my people. That's my heritage. How we made it through, I don't know. I really don't.
You should read Company of Liars by, I think it's Karen Maitland. It
Okay.
takes place in the medieval. I read it so long ago, but I believe it takes
Mhm.
place in the medieval period, and it's got like a weird. I don't want to say anything, but it's
Right.
so good if you're looking for
Okay.
more medieval references.
Right. Right. Yeah. If like when you read something like the Outlander series, oh, that is so cool. That is not authentic by any stretch of the imagination anywhere.
100%.
But you know what? That's not what we sign up for.
Of course.
We're not signing up for reality. There's just not something else I point out at this book. We eat more at the movie theater when we watch an adventure thriller than romance or horror or comedy. And the reason is we get so lost in these movies. You are literally going to eat more watching Tokyo Drift and John Wick than you are, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Wow, I'm really dating myself here. But things like that, because you get so invested. And my entire gym, we took a field trip to see the first John Wick. It is excellent.
Yeah.
And nobody got up and walked out every time he got hit by a car and kept going.
Sure.
Nobody. Because we were invested. That's the reality that was presented to us. Can I get hit that many times? No. Can Keanu Reeves? Yes. Yes, he can. That is the reality that's been presented to me. Create the reality for your reader. If you have a character that is a John Wick guy and he's just going to get shot and stabbed. Again, in the second book, there was an insurance company in England that looked at the workers' comp that should be owed to John Wick for all the injuries on the job. Nobody gets up and leaves because we're invested.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and get your reader invested. You can pull off a lot of things. Are there really hobbits that live in a hole in the ground, not a regular dank hole, but a comfortable hobbit hole? Mm-hmm. Yes, there are. Yes, there are. I know it for a fact because I know for a fact there are. Yes.
Carla, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been so fun. I love picking your brain. I look forward to reading your next Fight Right for writersdigest.com. But in the meantime, where can our listeners find you online?
They can find me online at fightright.net, FIGHTWRITE.net. On Instagram, I am FightRightCarla, FIGHTWRITECARLA. Not great with the social media. I'm great with. Social, not so much. Yeah. But my website is the best place to get in touch with me. And I tell people this, and I literally mean it. If you're having an issue in your fight scene, or if there's a subject that you're looking for that hasn't been on the Writer's Digest blog, hasn't been on my Fight Right blog, reach out to me. I will answer you. Promise.
Thank you for listening to Writer's Digest Presents. Join us next month for our Season 3 finale episode, where we'll be in conversation with author Sharon Short about her newest novel, Trouble Island. Until then, find us online at writersdigest.com or find us on social media at Writers Digest.